happy to share his knowledge. All right, we are live for another GEO Live, number 19, coming to you on this lovely 9th of September, 2024. I am Josh from GEO, and this is Chris, also from GEO. Let's, we've almost done 20 of these. It's getting up there. This one actually snuck up on me because we were like a week late doing our last one. It's like, oh crap, It's already time for another. But yeah, and last month's was excellent. If you didn't get a chance to catch that, go back and watch it on the YouTube channel. Jim Johnson and John McNamara discussing the history of the Democracy at Work network, peer worker co-op advising network that was around for 8-9 years, and really good stuff. And one of the people, we had a pretty good crowd for that one, and one of the people watching and commenting was Rebecca Kimball, who we're going to take a look at an article that she wrote for GEO today. And Rebecca is a worker owner at Union Cab in Madison, Wisconsin. She was one of the early board members for the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. She's on the board of the Democracy at Work Institute. I remember, I think it was in a conference in Worcester, Massachusetts, a worker co-op conference. The first ones I went to back in like 2013 or something like that. She received an award for, or maybe it was 2016 in Austin. I can't remember. Anyway, she got an award for, all her work in the worker co-op movement as a whole, not, beyond just that within her local co-op. And she was also kind of outside the co-op world. She was an alderman or alderperson, I guess, for Madison, Wisconsin. So she was an elected city representative for a while. And she has written an article called Back to Basics: Aligning Our National Organizations with Co-op Principles. Chris, did you get a chance to look at this at all? Have you read this?
No, I barely saw it. I think this morning. I didn't get a chance to read it.
It is spicy.
Was it?
It's got some good. Maybe, although that's maybe the wrong word. Shouldn't use that. It's very, it's not a ranty or anything like that. It's a very good history of U.S. Federation and DAWI. And here I will throw it up on screen. And I just want to say, by the way, I made this image, and I'm quite proud of it, that I figured out how to cut the hand out so nicely and put the text behind it. Anyway, so
I was wondering where you got that from. I did see that graphic.
I made it myself. Yes, I just got a Creative Commons of like the chalkboard with the hand and just a blank chalkboard, and then I put the text behind it. So yes, I felt quite clever. I figured out how to use the magic wand tool on the graphics editor, the Linux graphics editor, which shall not be named. Those who know. Anyway, back to basics: aligning our national organizations with co-op principles. You can maybe get from the title that this is going to be not just this is going to have a little bit of critique in it, and it certainly does. So what she talks about in the article is how the U.S. Federation started out really as a very member-directed. The U.S. Federation and DAWI both started out as very member-directed organizations, and the members being co-ops, worker co-ops, worker co-op developers, worker owners, practitioners. And over time, that has shifted. And rather than being organizations that are directed by the members, they have become organizations that are directed by the staff. And their focus has shifted from organizing among worker co-ops and helping worker cooperators organize among themselves to more advocacy on the national government level and more being, as she says, a trade union, or kind of a trade organization, much less than an organizing body, and specifically and most problematically staff-led and staff-directed, not member-led and directed. So, and she goes into, we'll zoom in a little bit. Let's see, that's good. How to, how that's happened, how she thinks that's happened, why it happened, and a little bit about how she thinks we should be working to get that back. And it's a very good article. It's a little bit long. If you're not into reading it, I made an audio version. It is on our YouTube channel. Got uploaded this morning, as well as embedded at the top of the text article here. But yeah, it's really good. She mixes in stories from her experiences at Union Cab to kind of highlight and contrast some of the issues that she sees at the US FWC and DAWI. So this is kind of, so this is one of the things, and so that's kind of, broad overview, trying to give you an idea of what's in the article. Some specific things that I would like to hit on, and I'm really hoping that we can get Rebecca to come on to our next month's live stream. Like I said, this one snuck up on me, and I didn't get a chance to ask her, but she will be getting an email asking her to show up to one of our upcoming ones and talk about this herself. But in case that doesn't happen, or takes a while, I think there's some things in here that deserve to be highlighted, and that I heard nobody else talk about. So one of the things specifically, so she talks about where they get their money from. And so she says in 2013 marked the beginning of the erosion of democracy at the US FWC and DAWI. Prior to 2011, board and member working groups participated in all levels of strategic planning and direction for decisions, of this magnitude. She's talking about the, I believe, what is she talking about? Them stopping Don, at any rate. Yes. DAWI, which is the Democracy at Work Institute. Oh, okay. I'm making a hash of this. Sorry. There's a lot of history, and I'm kind of don't want to spend all my time, I guess, giving a bunch of background. Here's the nut. I'll just get to the thing that I was like, ooh, my goodness. So a lot of the funding that US FWC gets used to be mostly from member dues. It has shifted to where now, and we can see here, let's see if we can, me make this a little bit bigger. Most of the income for the Federation is coming in from grant funding. You can see here 1.2 million in grant funding on their 990s in 2022, as opposed to $121,000 in member dues. This is problematic. I'm just going to say, like, from my perspective, and Rebecca agrees, but from my personal perspective, not trying to talk for her, this is highly problematic because the staff of the Federation, i.e. the people who are like day-to-day doing the stuff, getting paid to do stuff, most of their money is not coming from the members, paying their bills, paying their salaries, not coming from the members, coming from grant funders. So who do you think, that whose interests is the staff most likely to serve if there is ever any conflict? And I don't know. It's really troubling to see that kind of massive discrepancy.
Yeah. Hey, Josh, has there ever been even like a dues strike in the history of? And with I think a dues strike is a powerful thing to make an organization responsive, and that's not even possible in this structure or in this way of doing things.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Obviously a dues strike is like, okay, well, there's, I guess, 10%, the income. We still got 90% plus coming in from grant funding and doing, whatever sales and services they're, $468,000 a year worth of. But yeah, so the idea behind this organization was created with a lot of, hard work of the members. And as Rebecca says, for the, beginning of the history, the first, half, about the first half of their history or so, the first 6-7 years, it was a working board, and with just two staffers. Now I think there's got to be 20 staffers or something like that. And what's happened over time, and there are reasons for these numbers. Obviously, $27,000 of member dues, even plus the 94. You can say like 110,000 or so. It's not really paying for a lot. And if we're trying to have, actual people available to help the members and stuff, the member dues were not going to cover it. And so some grant funding was probably always going to be necessary on some level, maybe, but it certainly seems to have ballooned. Yeah. So as far as where is this money is going, and she doesn't give any particular percentages here, but I'm sure she is not being misleading, knowing Rebecca. But so she says, while 67% of funding comes from grants, much of which was used to support Operation Gilded, the freelancer co-op incubated by the USFWC. So question, Chris, do you know what Gilded is? I mean, apart from what's in the sentence?
No.
No, right. Yeah. I mean, I've heard of it, but only because I try to pay a close attention. I heard of it a couple of years ago, I think. Haven't heard of it recently. Haven't heard anything going on. Yeah, certainly a freelancer co-op that's being incubated. I mean, it seems like a rather unusual thing. And apparently, according to Rebecca, that's what much of that 1.2 million in grant funding is going for. Again, is this something that the members came up with? They're like, hey, what we really need is a freelancer co-op. You should incubate that, USFWC. No. As Rebecca says, it took over a year for the members to be able to get an item on the agenda for the member meeting. It took over a year for members of the USFWC to be able to get an item onto their own meeting agenda. Is a problem, and it's a problem that nobody's really discusses it. It's been addressed. It's been brought up, I know, within the USFWC. There have been a lot of discussions on the board members. There have been several disgruntled board members. I will say that, I know it personally, who left because of stuff like this, but it never has been like brought up for the whole membership. And the Federation themselves does not seem to be willing to really do that. And so, it's been up to us. So here we are once again being the conscience of the movement. This is not to pat ourselves on the back too much, but I mean, really, we got to talk about this stuff, because this is I think is very problematic. Obviously, Rebecca does as well. Here's another issue that has not been brought up, although, again, I have heard in my conversations with people across the country with different co-op networks that they haven't been too happy with their relationships with the U.S. Federation. And this is the next thing is, I think, going to show us maybe part of the reason why that is. So there was a long-standing agreement. And I remember this, hearing about this when I started at GEO over 10 years ago and first started really getting into worker co-ops and learning a lot about them and the national kind of movement. Was that the Federation wanted to encourage individual co-ops to be members of regional and local co-op federations and networks, right? They didn't want to be competing for dues with those local and regional networks. We didn't want to put a individual co-op in a situation where they're like, well, we can either be a member of VOC or we can be a member of the USFWC. We don't want to do that kind of competition. And so they created this dues sharing policy where the USFWC said, okay, if your co-op is a member of a regional co-op network, then we'll let you offset your USFWC dues, count those regional network dues as, against your USFWC dues. So it was on the website for years. This was the policy, as it was explained to me, like I said, over a decade ago, and it got changed. How Rebecca found out that this got changed was because MadWork, the Madison Regional Worker Co-op Network, they contacted USFWC in order to make such an arrangement, and they worked with the staff at the USFWC based on this, on the website, as it says here. Let's see if we can zoom in there for people, so that you can basically offset up to half of your USFWC dues if you can show that you're part of a regional organization. And so this was on the website. MadWork goes to USFWC. They're working with some staffers to formalize an agreement about this for their members, and then they get their agreement written up and they take it to the executive director for sign off. The executive director tells them that's not the policy anymore. The policy has been changed. There is no more dues sharing agreement or anything like that. And in fact, if any regional network wants to have such an agreement, they need to negotiate with the ED on an individual one-on-one basis, there's no longer any general policy about this. Who made that decision to change that policy? It was not the USFWC board. The USFWC board was not aware that the policy had been changed. One can only assume that it was the unilateral decision of the executive director. I think that's So what Rebecca thinks, it's kind of the only conclusion I think you can draw. And so as she shows, the website thereafter changed, and they removed this section about discounting for regional dues paid, and now that section no longer exists on the website. Again, this is highly problematic for a supposedly member-led, member-run organization, that such a fundamental policy can be changed without the board being made even appraised of it. Of course, anything like this should have originated, one would hope, from the membership, or at the very least from the board. And they weren't even told about it until somebody tried to to go and apply the actual policy that should probably still be in place technically. I mean, if was the original decision that was made and there was some kind of illegitimate unilateral decision to overturn that, I would think that really there should still be a dues policy or a dues sharing policy in place. But at any rate, those are two things I wanted to bring up. I don't really have a whole lot else to talk about on that, but I just wanted to point out these because it is a long article. It's kind of buried in here, but there are a couple of nuggets that I think really point to like something's up. Like it's really not okay. So, anyway, I'll leave it there. Chris, you got anything you want to add?
Yeah. So it's in Spanish on the GEO website. It's called the Regreso a las Bases. Interesting they chose Las Bases, because it means grassroots, return to the grassroots. Which shout out, wasn't the Interpreters Co-op that did that?
Yep.
Yeah, shout out to the Interpreters Co-op. You can reach them virtually. They'll do virtual interpretation. Yeah, I'm glad that it got translated in Spanish, because I'm sharing it to some of my neighbors who are barely learning about the USFWC, so that people are not romanticizing something. Have a better idea of how things are. And I noticed that some of the photos in the translation didn't get a chance to get translated. So I'm telling my neighbors, let me know if you need me to translate the photos, and I'll see if I can share that if that happens. Just one thing that I was just thinking about, just grateful that this important criticism actually made its way into Spanish, and I don't know what other languages need it.
I think that's a big one, and definitely shout out to the ICM crew for doing that. Their turnaround time on this was astounding. Rebecca asked about getting it translated, and I told her the last time we did anything like that, it was with ICM, and a couple days later, showed up in my inbox. So, and here, actually, you get to see my homepage. There it is. Yes, for our Spanish speakers. So good on them for getting that that made. And unfortunately we didn't get the pictures. They didn't get translated, but hopefully comes through anyway. Majority of it. But one other thing I did want to touch on that she points out, and I think this gets to, I was happy actually to see somebody else making this critique, because it's one that I've had and kind of kept to myself because I didn't know exactly how fringe it was or not, but apparently not too much if Rebecca shares it. But she says here, through USFWC and DAWI programs, hundreds of people have been trained as worker co-op developers. Cities have been encouraged to become involved in the employee ownership field, and new co-ops and ESOPs have been developed. State and national level policies have been championed and passed. There is now even a division of employee ownership in the U.S. Department of Labor, thanks to their advocacy work. And they have spent a great deal of time organizing capital. But all this work has been done without meaningful or democratic engagement with the worker cooperative movement on the ground, and without connection to a larger movement. A worker cooperative is just another form of business, lacking the transformative potential that comes with self-determination, solidarity, and trade networks built on trusting relationships. So this was the relevant section, right? Part of what USFWC has managed to do and been spending time and money doing, getting a division of employee ownership at the U.S. Department of Labor. The criticism of that, because most people think, oh, that's good, right? Like, that's good. Well, let's see. Rebecca down here somewhere talks about how, we don't want to turn the movement, or the movement has been turned into, how'd she say it? Basically just kind of, well, at the top of our movement now sits a bureaucrat in the Department of Labor. It's kind of what she says. I'm totally dropping the ball on finding that particular quote. But yeah, so, she's definitely, kind of critical of that focus on, federal legislation, federal recognition, all of this stuff. I am also critical of that focus. I specifically, it came to my attention when saw Ro Khanna, congressman, was supporting some co-op stuff, and so his name was on the USFWC website. And then I see the other thing that Ro Khanna is in the news for is being a big crypto guy, being a big crypto supporter. So I'm like, oh great, yeah, let's hitch our star to the crypto guy. But he's a Democrat, so it's cool. No, it's not cool. So even, it's like you end up aligning yourself politically with people. If you know the political world, if you know politicians, if you've hung out with those people at all, as I have somewhat enough to find out, oh my God, I don't want to be in this world. You may think that you're going to use this politician for something. They're using you. They are using you. So yeah, we don't have enough power or influence to play with on those levels and have any kind of like on an equal footing with anybody, which means we are pawns in other people's games when we're up playing on those levels, really. And so it's not even a matter of, well, politics makes strange bedfellows. Yeah, well, sometimes, but sometimes you're just straight up you're going to be taken advantage of. You definitely, Ro is not going to have our back on anything ever, but it will definitely want ours on all his stuff, including the crypto things, So let's see, we've got yeah. So anyway, I'm kind of skeptical of that. I also think if we look at Argentina, what's going on in Argentina right now with their cooperative movement under attack, they've had a somewhat, we'll say, Trump-like figure, right-wing fake populism guy get into their presidency, and one of the political attacks that he is carrying out on his political opponents are messing with worker co-ops, because they are seen and aligned with the left part of the government. So again, the more you align yourself in partisan politics with one, on the national level, you're kind of putting a target on your back for whoever the enemies are of the people that you aligned with. And that can be real dangerous. You end up becoming a political football, and we don't want our movement to be a political football. I don't think that would be useful, personally.
What are one co-op principle is supposed to be autonomy. I don't understand where that ever manifests really in a lot of the co-ops that I talk to. because everybody's just trying to get government contracts, and well, not everybody, but a lot of people are trying to get that state patronage, and at this point, it's like it's for a lot of people. I guess they kind of. It seems that a lot of people don't understand how life existed without the government or without these states.
Hmm.
So it's just like a given. Like, can we survive without that state patronage?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's part of
We're
the
giving
modern
up our
crisis.
autonomy. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it too with the, there's this one nonprofit I worked at, and the grants they had, they were, the government defined everything, defined, and it didn't make sense. It didn't actually help anybody. It just forced people to lie. Um, and I've seen how this manifests. Seen so many co-ops in Chicago. I'm sorry, seen so many nonprofits in Chicago um, lying about what they're doing, seeing them all in a room and clapping about their so-called successes, and actually, like, knowing what that looks like and where the lies are, and seeing that there's not any success except maybe one, and they fought really hard to try to identify that one maybe success, and it wasn't a success. And of course, their idea of success has nothing to do with real, like, self-determination, real community empowerment. Um, that's what
Yeah.
is that what the what a lot of the worker co-ops are just going to become. It's forced to lie to meet uh, grant expectations, or from the government, which the government often
Hmm.
just invests in ways to have us
Yeah.
destroy ourselves. It doesn't impress me. I don't
Yep.
get excited about this stuff. And going through the article, there's a lot of people who have talked about this outside of Geo, but it's politically incorrect to talk about it. Um,
I mean, when you say talk about, you mean like someplace where I could look it up online and read it, and
no, it's
like
like it
publicly, or
happens.
just like personal conversations?
Personal conversations with it's like at the
Exactly.
periphery of, like, the main topic. It's like it's just not. Yeah, people are afraid to, get on camera or really document it. Or it's just like, I think. And maybe the other part of it is just that people are just so busy that they don't really get a chance to think about these principles, or unpack what this is. And maybe that's part of, like, the transformation of humanity, and the growth of states, of oppressive governments, the representative government, and all that.
I think this is where we can learn a lot from the like informal sector, as it's called, and all the a lot of people living in the third world countries. A term, by the way, which is not derogatory. Just listen to Radhika Desai, Indian economist, if you're confused about that. But anyway, third world countries have a lot to teach us about that, because a lot of what their cooperative practices, that they've had forever, not dependent at all on states, and formed long before the states formed, and oftentimes are there, and are still going, because the states are so weak and can't be counted on to do much of anything, which is more and more the case for more and more people in the US as well. So I think we should be looking there. But you're right. Yeah, it's politically incorrect to talk about. It's frightening to talk about, because the as you said, the nonprofits who are being misleading about their actual results in order to keep the grant money coming in. They're the ones with grant money coming in who have, they're going to maybe hire you or something. You don't want to piss off the people with the money. Some of us just don't care, but that's, we're fairly rare, it seems like. So yeah, it's difficult to talk about, but somebody needs to. We had the same thing go on in New York. Like, I know for a fact, we looked into, some of that stuff after the what happened with the city funding there. And there was a lot of exaggeration about the effectiveness of that money. There were a lot of problems with it. One, the money from the state that came in, even to like the organizations that were like legitimately knew what they were doing and had good stuff to do, you know, they got screwed over because they were expected to do these programs and to like start the, you know, do all these things that they got the grant money for, but you don't get the grant money until like a year and a half later. But you're expected to do all the stuff up front before you've gotten the money. So that causes all kinds of problems. And then you have organizations that didn't have any particular experience or knowledge about worker co-ops, but nonetheless got in on this deal to get some of this grant money. And then, as you were saying, you know, doing the old, well, you know, we'll kind of put some lipstick on this pig, you know, kind of, you know, polish the turd, as it were, and make it, you know, try to make this look good, and claimed that they were creating way more worker co-ops. Like if all of the businesses, worker co-ops that have been claimed to be created in New York City actually existed, there would be like thousands, I think, at this point, and it's not the case. So, you know, they kind of just count anybody who showed any interest at all. Sometimes is what it seemed like was going on. But yeah, nobody wants to say anything about it, because then there's also the fear that, oh, well, what if the funders hear this and then they'll stop giving us money. So the nonprofits who are lying about what they're doing and how effective they are going to stop having a gravy train. Am I supposed to be concerned about this? Right? The problem is it's not working. And I think this is another thing that, and she points out in this article, again, something that nobody talks about, because everybody wants to be positive all the time. I want to be positive too, but I also want to be realistic. And when I got involved in this movement over 10 years ago, we had the number that was bandied about around 300 worker co-ops. I don't think we have 400 now, 10 years later. Like, we have not seen a massive flourishing of worker co-ops, and even the membership of the U.S. Federation, as she points out, like in their biennial report, every 2 years, they put out a report with some data in it. And they showed, like in, I don't know, was it 2021, they had 370 members and added 74 new members. And then in 2022, they had 378 members and added some. And so it was like, wait a minute. So obviously, like, you know, 30 co-ops or, you know, some large number of members stopped being members of the Federation. What happened? Why? Did you do an exit interview? Does anybody know anything at all about this? No. We'll just talk about, you know, how many new members we added, and not the fact that we just lost 10% of our membership last year. So yeah, a lot of money has gone into worker co-op development. I have not seen the results from it. I'm not saying people should stop putting money into worker co-op development, but I am saying that maybe the places where we're sending that money are not the right places. Maybe the people you're giving it to aren't the right people. Maybe they don't know what to do with it. So yeah, at any rate, but also maybe we do just need to stop getting a bunch of money from, you know, massive foundations. Like, I don't think we should want Warren Buffett's money. Like, that is corrosive. That's, you know, you're going to start, people are going to start, you know, trying to work towards, you know, whatever is going to make Peter Buffett happy, instead of, you know, us actually having some autonomy. And it interferes with our actual ability to really exert our true power and potential, which again, Rebecca talks about and gives a great example of in her article. She uses the example in Wisconsin, in Madison. The union cab used to provide a whole bunch of rides to people to their medical appointments. Like, you know, people with mobility issues had regular medical appointments. Union cab, you know, got the like contract from the state, I think, to or from the city to do that, to provide those rides. At some point, the city stopped working with the local cab companies and outsourced this service to Logisticare, some big corporation who sent these contracts out to the local carriers and said, okay, if you want to keep providing these rides to people's medical appointments, you have to sign these contracts, and you're going to drug test all of your drivers, and you're going to only charge us below rate fares for these riders. And the members at Union Cab talked about it, and they had their manager came and said, okay, we need to sign this because this is a huge part of our business. And the members at Union Cab looked at the contract and said, no, we don't like it. We don't like the drug tests. We don't like the below rate fares. Nope. So you tell them this. You tell them they can work with us on the terms that we have for all of our clients, or they can take a hike and tell the state, I guess we can't fulfill your contract that you gave us. And the other cab companies, privately owned in town, heard what Union Cab had done and said, yeah, what they said, and jumped on board. And Logisticare had to fold and had to say, okay, all right, you tell us what the deal is, because they didn't have a choice. And so the workers, right, and you see what happened there. The manager came, and he had, very, the rational, this is the thing, we just have to bite the bullet and do this thing and sign the contract. And it was the workers, it was that democratic process that said, no, we don't have to do it. And that had the strength and the courage to stand up to them. And that then encouraged and gave strength and courage to other businesses to also do the same. And they got a good outcome out of it, because they didn't just let the manager, lead the show. And they actually were serious about their worker democracy. Everybody benefited from it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people want to be in those government rooms, and whenever I see that, I'm not impressed. I don't want to be in those rooms. I'm very so there was in Chicago, there was some government grant funding, another. I mean, I'm not gonna say the solidarity economy is perfect, what people call solidarity economy today and the solidarity economy movement. I'm not gonna say it's perfect. I'm not saying that it's what everybody should be striving to do, what you see. But the government's trying to do something else in Chicago called community wealth building. And that's their way to co-op, or the energies, suck the energies of the solidarity economy movements. And so they've been pumping money into things. And me and some friends were like, nah, we don't want to be in that. And they're we said we need to be forming relationships with other folks that exist outside of that lure for money. So all this time that we spent outside of the government offices, I don't regret any of it. It's been great, traveling here and there, trying to meet each other, develop those relationships. And it's hard. It's hard, but I feel like we're building something that's more important than that lure for that patronage. But here's the other thing, though. It's I'm reminded of two stories. One is that some of the co-op folks wanted to do a meeting here in Chicago, and they wanted to do it at this building. And I recall getting carded at that building, which that's cool with me. I can get carded, that's fine. But I had a friend who they're not undocumented, but they can't be getting carded because they're a person of color. They can't get in places if they're getting carded. And so I asked, I said, hey, isn't that place where they card people? And so the white fellow goes, no, they don't card anybody. And then a black fellow jumped on the conversation. He's like, oh yeah, they do card people. And we're like, oh, okay, we see what's going on. It seems that maybe they don't card the white folks. And so
wait a minute, wait a minute, Chris, I'm confused here. What are you saying? But the white guy said they don't card anybody. Yeah, all right.
And so I was like, yeah, I don't want to be in those spaces where I can't have my folks with me. But then also in these government spaces, you know, that friend can't join. It means a lot to me. But also, I chill out with a lot of people who are not, you know, who are not documented, who don't have U.S. citizenship. They're not allowed in those spaces. You know, like they don't feel comfortable in those spaces. So I really don't want to be in those spaces where people are also comfortable with that fact. You know,
Yeah.
so I'd rather chill out with, you know, outside. I don't want to be in these government spaces, and I don't feel comfortable with people who think it's cool to be in spaces where, you know, my folks are not allowed. Um, that's something that comes to mind when people want to seek all this patronage from the government.
Yeah. I mean, it's intoxicating though to be in those spaces. It can be, you know, if you're being, you know, you're being kind of, well, as we say, having a bunch of smoke blown up your ass by, you know, some powerful, local powerful guys, you know, people telling you, oh, this is great. No, we want to support you. And especially if you've been struggling to try to scrape together funds to do some project, you know, and all of a sudden you've got like people who you see on the news every night, like, you know, patting you on the back and saying they want to, you know, help you out. That can be really intoxicating and you feel good and feels like, oh, maybe we're winning and maybe we can, you know, and it's easy to convince yourself that, oh, this is really a good thing. But those same people, and I've experienced this on like relatively small levels, will just like, you know, they'll be all about you one day and then the next something will have changed and they're like, they're not even going to take your phone call anymore. Right? Like who, like they don't care, right? You were being used for that moment. Now that moment's gone and it's like on to the next thing. That's how politicians and you know, and governments tend to work, at least the ones that I've experienced and been involved with. So yeah, like I mean, just a very like minor kind of example of that when uh, trying to help some friends set up a worker co-op, and we are in the process of looking at different possible business ideas, and one of them was doing a pedal powered trash pickup along our bike trails in Missoula, and so we put together a proposal because they just like drive the pickup truck down the bike trail to pick up empty the garbage cans, and that, you know, seemed pretty not in keeping with the whole bike trail thing. So we made a proposal. We took it to Parks and Rec. We got a couple meetings with the Parks and Rec people. They were very supportive. They really liked it. It felt really good. I remember coming out of the meeting where we had like pitched them and they loved it. They ate it up. And I was like, dude, that like, it felt so good. Like out of the park, just like, yeah, rocked it. And then, you know, and they were telling us like, oh yeah, no, we're like, this is going in the budget, and you know, but you know, lots of stuff goes in the budget that doesn't make it through, and you know, our thing got cut, and it was just like, you know, you go it, but you know, it's, I don't know, like gambling or something. You get that high when it seems like things are going well, but it will be taken away from you like that, which is one of the reasons why I stopped working in politics to begin with. You know, that realization that like you have really no control. I mean, even less so than we do in just most of life. But when you're dealing with politicians, like you have no guarantees, no control. They don't care about you, right? And that is really, I think, the crux of it. Like when we're in those spaces, you have to like those people. They're not there. They didn't invite you into their space because they care about you. That's not it at all. And if we want to be building a solidarity economy, don't we want to be hanging out with people who legitimately care about us and who we care about? That's so.
Yeah, there's also just also the structures where like you can have someone who cares about you, but they're answering to somebody else or to something else, and they can't do it. You know, I remember one time we're doing this canvassing in a building, and it was really cool to help out tenants, and it was really cool to see kind of tenants at some point just kind of talking about the management in the building. They're like, you know what, like that person does care, but they're not really allowed to do anything that can help us. And part of me was like, man, F these managers or whatever, like they don't care. But then, you know, I was like, well, these people are not. I don't know more than these people. They're probably telling the
Right.
truth, and I've seen that here and there,
Yeah.
and I
They're
think they
doing the
were
best they're
telling the truth.
allowed to do, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. I have heard stories since where managers did stuff that they didn't have to do, and um, but yeah, do you want to hang out with, do you want to have packs with people who ultimately aren't really calling their own shots, can't keep their word, or
Yeah.
are forced to lie?
Yeah.
Um,
But I mean, it can definitely though be. I think it's useful definitely to have relationships. I don't think you should be opposed to having relationships with the manager at the apartment building, with the super or whatever, or with the bureaucrats at City Hall, um, because sometimes having a good personal relationship with those people will help you, you know, get something or avoid something that is useful for your group or for your endeavors. But you don't want to we don't want to be depending on these people for anything, mission, what do you call it, mission critical. We don't want to be, and that's what ends up happening a lot. It's very easy to get co-opted, um, and to get sucked into that sphere, because that is where the money is, and it is where the people who, the movers and shakers are. So you feel like you can make stuff happen. But the reality is, there's lots of different ways to make stuff happen. You don't need to, we don't need to be going out and looking for, trying to get a government to sign off or to approve of something that we're doing, much less to fund it. Because then, and in Canada, they found this out, to their detriment. Their co-op movement up there, the parts of their co-op movement were highly dependent on government funding. They had a change in government, and a bunch of their co-op development funding went away. Wasn't a problem in Quebec, where they have a very, tight knit, grassroots, and their scene, co-op development scene, they were taking care of themselves. But in some of the other provinces, that were much more dependent on getting the grant money from the government, didn't go so well for them. It really caused a lot of havoc. But also, I also am of the opinion, though, that we shouldn't cut off our nose to spite our face. While we shouldn't go begging for handouts from the government, I also don't think we should necessarily reject out of hand anything that comes from that direction. So, for instance, the USDA rural development. There's a lot of good information that you can get from USDA rural development. Margaret Bow wrote an article recently for us. She's been their head of rural co-op development services for forever. Wonderful woman, very committed to stuff, and has been responsible for creating some really great educational co-op content, with grassroots practitioners. And you gotta, I think we do need to be aware that the government is a very big place, and there are little, pockets of it where people find places where they can do good things, and they're still doing their job. But it's also useful for us. Again, it's not mission critical that we have, an interview with, Melba Smith, for instance. But boy, am I glad that, Margaret Bow did that interview. It was a great interview, and she did it for the USDA. And, like I said, it's fine, I think, to be on, have good personal relations and stuff, and keep those relationships intact. But again, only when it's a situation of, okay, we're all equals here. And if you're trying to get something out of them, we're not equals. So
the only like, what's the alternative to that? I mean, something that maybe a lot of people don't think about, but I'll speak to those who do think about this. The in Rojava, where those co-ops are, they don't have, um, a government. They don't have a relationship with governments the same way that the co-ops don't have relationships with governments the same way that like they do in the United States. To my understanding, um, the government that existed is, or the government that exists, well, they're just under attack by the governments, really. So they're in like what's considered Syria, but also what Turkey considers the future of its Ottoman Empire that it's going to bring back. Um, so they're just attacking those co-ops. They're just trying to kill those people, and so they can't get subsidies out of those state entities. They're just being killed. Um, what's going on? Their water's being restricted. They're trying to set their fields on fire. They're bombing them. Um, the they don't Yeah, they don't have like a state power that they're leaning on. What outside of the co-ops, the closest thing that people might kind of, when people are thinking about support from some other entity, they have it's no longer called the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria. What is it called now? I think it's got another name. But yeah, it's this is different. It exists within the areas of the co-ops are. Some might call it a government, some might not. Um, and they're not really key so far, it seems like, to the co-op survival. The co-ops depend on each other and their communities. And um, though the autonomous administration does step in here and there when the co-ops reach out to them and ask them for help, I'm not sure it's ever for like grants. It's possible it's happened. Oh, thanks. It's now called the Democratic Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria. Um, but a lot of the co-ops up to now, it seems that they're pretty self-sufficient, and they, of course, they have a lot of things that they need to build up. There's a lot of problems that they have that they're trying to solve that they haven't solved yet. Um, and so, for those who have problems, those in the worker co-op world who have problems imagining, a trajectory of the worker co-op, um, of worker co-ops without the state patronage. And then there's also in here in Chicago, we had a visitor come from, I think, Guatemala. It was a lady, and so, I'm sorry I forget, but she came and she was talking about the co-ops over there in their country. But it was a Central American country, I believe, and she spoke in Spanish. She was a native woman, and there's an interesting question that someone here gave, and they asked. Of all the questions that were asked, this one was probably, and maybe I don't know if I'm imagining this, but it seems like this is probably the one that kind of really was like took that person aback. And so the question was, how do y'all deal with receiving subsidies from government, and how does that like figure into like the rhythms and the structures internally of your co-ops? And that that lady, she when that question was asked, and it seemed like when she kind of began to understand what the question was, she kind of like she moved physically back. She was like, what, like, did I hear that correctly? Or it just took her back. And her response was basically, we don't look for support from the governments. And it was essentially like, in the politest way, why would you do that? Like, the people that we trust are our neighbors, our friends, the people that we talk to and that we know. It's a tremendous inconvenience for us to go outside of our locality and to go to like the essentially like urban centers or state power centers of state power, to try to get that support. It's impractical. But there's this just other, and what else would they say that? And I think she was saying like it comes also at this cost, like where you become like the center of like news stories and all that, all this publicity that we don't want. And that's something that I still don't kind of understand today, because I feel like here in the US, people would love that publicity. Everybody wants that publicity. You know, um, and maybe that has to do with the destruction of like privacy in the US and how it's like it's a fad for us to be our own narcs. Um, But I wish that we could be like that more often, where we're like, why would we want to rely on someone outside of our neighbors, outside of the people we trust? Because I think that going into those government rooms, it comes at a cost, and maybe maybe that reflects our own social and personal illnesses. Maybe we don't have enough of those relationships that we don't know what we don't have, and maybe like yeah, we don't know what we're gonna lose because maybe we already don't have it. That's a thought that comes to mind.
Yeah, that's what I found in my time in Nepal, and what I found really refreshing about the way people there view politics and politicians as compared to people here, is that everyone is a cynic there. Like here in the US, I am considered a very cynical person politically. In Nepal, everybody shares my view. Every politician is corrupt. They're lying every time they open their mouths. Like, it's just known. Even the politicians themselves make jokes about how everybody knows how corrupt they are and how corrupt they are. They're just make jokes about how corrupt they are. And so same kind of attitude, a highly cooperative, very cooperative culture. Cultures, I should say. There are many, like 50 some ethnic groups in that tiny little country. But because of that, the government, for most people, it's like you only interact with them maybe twice a year, probably only once a year, when you have to go pay taxes for your piece of farmland. And that's it. They don't do much of anything else. You know Provide a school that is barely functions. And if you really want anything to get done in that country, people have village committees, and they are very good at organizing together, fundraising together to do things. One of the first things that I impressed me so much when I was there in was it 2004, I guess, or maybe no, it was 2001 actually. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The micro hydro project. One of my friends took me to his village, like way out in the middle of like nowhere. We had to walk like hours on a little foot trail to get to it. And they have their like power. They have electricity 24 hours a day. In the city that we had just came from, like in Kathmandu Valley, people only had power for like 6 hours a day because of load shedding, and you had like rolling blackouts regularly and stuff. And then out here in the country, you've got 24/7 power. Like, this is amazing. And he showed me all these little micro hydro things and all the power lines that the community members had just gotten together and put up all the power lines connecting these little hydro facilities and connecting all the people's houses to them. And they ran it themselves with no help from the government because they needed to do it. And they never, it wouldn't even just like you're that woman from Guatemala or wherever, like they wouldn't have even thought about asking the government to help. It's ridiculous, right? And I think we would maybe get a lot more done in this country if we shared that kind of attitude. Like, instead of like, how do we put together a campaign to try to convince our government to fund X? Why don't we just get together and try to do X? And I hope that they don't notice, if anything. So yeah, again, like I said, I think we have a lot to learn from people in those countries who remember some of this stuff.
I didn't know about the USFWC being that funded by grants. That doesn't that's not a good selling point for anybody to join up an org if they want to have meaningful control about it.
Right. I mean, 90% of the money is already coming from grants. Why do you need my dues, right?
It can't be. I don't imagine how it could be grassroots led though, if it's funded.
It's not.
Like that.
I mean, that's the nut of the whole of her article, is that they are not they're not member led, they're not grassroots led at all, like in any meaningful sense at this point.
So if a grassroots led movement's gonna emerge, I think that naturally it's gonna emerge outside of the USFWC until the. I mean, that's how I see it. Maybe there can be organizers within the USFWC that's going to help that happen. And an article like by Rebecca and where GEO is also an affiliate of the USFWC. It's probably part of that. But
yeah, we were founding members. I mean, that organization grew out of work that we did to put together the first directory of worker co-ops in the U.S. And so, yeah, no, I mean, and this is a conversation that comes up. Again, it's one that's had personally. People don't like to be public about it, but at some point, it's like, how many years go by when we're not going to say anything? We just talk amongst ourselves. Like, at what point do you just give up on the old org and just start a new one? Or do you just write off that, like, well, that got captured, that got co-opted, that turned into something we don't like anymore, let's start something new? Or do you recover it and try to, and that's why I think most of the people in GEO are of the latter opinion. Like, we can't just write it off. There is a democratic process there. There are actual bylaws, even if they're not being followed. It should be possible. It should be possible. It hasn't been possible just through board elections, though. I will say that, because Rebecca has been on the board. We have had other people who I won't name here, but who have been on the board, who we're friends with, who share her perspectives very much so. And we're also very frustrated when they would suggest, like, maybe we should ask the members what they want us to do. No, that doesn't go over well. It's now that the staff tells the membership what the staff is doing, and the membership is expected to applaud, and that's it. To put it like real bluntly there. Sorry. So yeah, that is kind of the situation. So I think there just needs to be pressure, right? I just think people need to start talking about it. It needs to become a thing. That, like, oh, the Federation kind of got off track, huh? It's sad, but I think it's there. I mean, and not to like just run down that organization. It's done a lot of good things. Like I said, we were founding members. We put together a whole 20th anniversary issue. We also did a 10th anniversary issue 10 years ago. A lot of articles people have written about all the great things they've done. Nobody's trying to discount those. There are problems, though. We need to discuss
for those who feel an affinity or an attachment to the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops, I think they got to frame it like we're off track, instead of like this otherization. Yep. Like, if it means that much to you, then you should be identifying with it. If not, then that's something to examine.
I mean, I don't know that it's quite so black and white as identifying with it or not. Like, it's, we can identify with the original mission of the organization, why we created it, why we helped create it in the first place, and not identify with the direction that the leadership has been taking it in for the last 5-10 years or so. The question becomes, is there anything that can be done about it? Like, is there any way for the people who founded the organization to, and those who share their perspectives, who are members of the organization, say, look, this is not what we had in mind. We need to bring it back to something else. Is there any mechanism to do that? I mean, I guess we'll find out. Because it might be the case there's just no mechanism for that. And so you end up with an organization that can be just taken over by a couple of charismatic people who, run it how they see fit, and there's not much you can do about it. But that's a poorly designed organization, if that is the case. So, I mean, maybe it's time to end the stream since keep popping in and out here. I think my internet is terrible. So we've been on for over an hour. I think Chris is frozen, at least for me. So I think we're just going to abruptly end it. Thank you, viewers, for joining us. MJ, especially, for chiming in the comments there. We will be back in a month, second Monday, same bat time, same bat channel. See you then. What's going on?